All right, thank you for joining us. Again, my name is Calandra Waters-Lake. I'm the Sustainability Director, and we really appreciate you registering for Sustaina-bite. Sustaina-bite is our lunchtime information session where we feature a university or local expert in their area through a lens of sustainability. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize the Indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today. The Cherenhaka-Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Patawamak, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respect to their tribal members past and present. If you're looking for this land acknowledgement, it can be found on the American Indian Resource Center's site. I'd also like to give a brief overview of what the definition of sustainability is, because depending upon where you're at or what field you're working in, that can vary slightly. This is the official definition for sustainability at William & Mary and is pretty similar to definitions that you would find in other higher education institutions. It recognizes the interdependence of human and natural systems, looking towards ecological principles as models, creating healthy, happy, and resilient communities, as well as healthy economies that recognize ecological limits, and decisions that recognize cause and effect across time, scale, and place. So as you can see, sustainability is about more than surviving or continuing. It's really about thriving, and we think of it as an ongoing and intentional process, similar to maintaining your health. We also point towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. We have a sustainability plan. We're finalizing a climate action plan. And so you can kind of see the scope of sustainability in those, but you can also see that very broad scope in the Sustainable Development Goals. And if you haven't been to this website, I highly encourage you to visit it. It's very user-friendly. All right, I'm going to hand things over to Sophie Pitaluga. She is our communications intern, and she's going to go over a few announcements before we get started. Sophie, it's all yours.
Thank you, Calandra. Hi, everyone. So the first event that's coming up is the Institute for Integrative Conservation's Mural Pitch, which is going on right now, where teams of students can pitch concepts for a local mural that will inspire conservation action in the local community. So individuals or teams can register by March 22nd, which is in a couple of days. And then a short video pitch is due on March 25th, just the concept. So this spring, really the only thing that's due is the concept for the mural and augmented reality experience. And then a competition will take place on April 9th, where the winning team will end up working in collaboration with professional programmers and artists to figure out the details for how to translate their concept into a mural and augmented reality experience in the fall. So again, you can register with a team, or if you're an individual looking to get connected with a team, you can sign up for the IIC's team matching system on their website, or email them directly at iic@williamandmary.edu. And you might get some ideas from the Sustaina-bite that will inspire you to register. And then the next event is the Earth Day Sustaina-bite, or Earth Week Sustaina-bite, which is with Dr. Molly Mitchell, who's the research assistant professor for the Center for Coastal Resources Management. And she's going to be discussing the impacts of climate change on a more local level. So that's going to be taking place during Earth Week on April 22nd. And then on that same wavelength, we have the William & Mary Sustainability Symposium, which will also be taking place during Earth Week, and will explore the interconnectedness of societies and ecosystems, arts and action, and individuals and impact, while highlighting the voices of Indigenous peoples and local communities. So it's a two-day event, and on April 20th, there will be an interactive discussion with the humanitarian and filmmaker Celine Cousteau, and will be then followed by a keynote event with the environmentalist and political activist Winona Leduc on April 21st. So after the event today, we'll send out a follow-up with links to register for all three of these events.
Thanks, Sophie. All All right, it is my pleasure to introduce today's featured guest, Danielle Moretti-Langholtz. She is the Thomasina Jordan Director of American Indian Resource Center. She's also the senior lecturer in the Department of Anthropology and administrator of the Interdisciplinary Native Studies minor. Her research focus is on the political resurgence of Virginia Indians. And as the curator of Native American art at the Muscarelle Museum of Art, Danielle has curated several major exhibitions, and she's working to expand the collection of Native American art. So through the blended environmental, social, and economic lens of sustainability, we're going to be discussing today art with a lens on Indigenous people and learn how art can highlight voices, connect disciplines, and drive change.
Thank you very much, everybody, for joining today. I'm pretty excited about this topic and spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I suppose where someone begins their presentation says a lot about what they're thinking about and what they might say. So first thing I wanted to start with is we have news also that Deb Holland, Laguna Pueblo native woman, is now our new Secretary of the Interior. And this is a first, and we'll see what this means for our sustainability, etc. I want to start with a piece that a special work that we've recently collected at the Muscarelle, Winter Sun by Cherokee artist Kay Walking Stick. It's a magnificent diptych, but I have it up here because the topic that I'm talking about is expansive, it is deep, and I thought about different ways to enter this topic, and it'd be really convenient to enter it at the current political level, but I think that misses so much, so I am going to take a big risk here and try to go deep and wide, but keep this image in mind as what I've been thinking about in constructing this piece, as well as this photograph by Eastern Band Cherokee photographer Bear Allison. We also have this image, and I like it because it appears that things are hidden. And I think this is also a good image to consider the topic that's so much about, on the one hand, Indigenous art, and linked to the topic of sustainability is right in front of us, and yet it also appears hidden to many of us. So I hope we can disperse some of these clouds today. I'm going to start with some basic questions that may seem a little challenging. First, what is Native American art? That would seem fairly straightforward, but it actually isn't. And how is sustainability identifiable in Native American art? And a little bit about current conversations that also involve tribal sovereignty, aspects of Indigenous knowledge in the topic. So the first image I have up, like you, no quiz here, but you can all decide what is Native American art. And I'm wondering if you look at this, would you classify this as art? Tribal, a Plains tribal war shirt, traditional porcupine beading, but yet a bit here, if you can see my cursor, of red trade cloth. Is this art? Are these two pieces art? These are in the Muscarelle collection. I have birch bark basket here, beautifully decorated with botanicals imagery. Here is a Cherokee pitch pine basket used for gathering and transporting water in an arid region. Would you consider these to be art? How about these? Seed pots from the American Southwest. I don't think I'm capable of making anything like this. Is it art? Is it craft? These pieces that I've shown you are not signed, so I don't have an artist to attribute them to, but I might be able to attribute them to a culture. So be thinking about that. Easier if I began today's talk with this piece. Sarah Whalen Lunn, an Alaska Native woman who is working very much in the domain of decolonization, women's rights, and her work titled Defend the Sacred, Our Bodies, Our Lands, Our Waters, very clearly shows her activist position, not only on water, and fishing, but also she's very involved in work with missing and murdered Indigenous women and doing artwork along those themes. This artwork, you're deciding. How about this poster you may be familiar with? And this is done by Isaac Murdoch. So this is signed, as Sarah Lunds was signed previously. Water is Life poster. Here, these posters are in action. Is this art? So I'm going to take a step back while you're thinking about what is art. It's a legitimate question that anthropologists, art historians, and Native people have actually had to face and deal with. But while we're thinking about that, we're going to start in our region. You will recognize these, I think, I hope, as the John White watercolors that were done, in the late 1500s, 1580s, etc. And I want to go in close on one of these. This is their manner of fishing in Virginia. And here, I think we can see an image that has been created to foster colonization, but it is rich with sustainability and food and life ways that look prosperous, things that Calandra was mentioning, interdependent systems that appear to be very prosperous and looks like plenty of room for colonists. And we might say, you know, these have been discussed various ways as advertisements for colonization, etc. My colleague in anthropology, Audrey Horning, has worked on these. Some of these actually visited our area. I think it was in 2008 at Jamestown, so we got to see real ones. But White was showing not just people, but the environment. And that this was a place you can come on here and just gather and you're going to be prosperous. One interesting aspect of these, we get to, in a way, first Europeans glimpse of Indigenous people. And in North America that I'm focusing on, primarily the continental United States, a little bit Alaska, as we had a piece already, it will be another 200 years before we see any visualization of Indigenous people. And that's going to be the work of George Catlin. So that's kind of astonishing. And I would mention, while we're not seeing oysters and shellfish, unless I'm missing that here, I see we see some crabs, etc. But my colleague Martin Gallivan is working on oysters and looking archaeologically at what that he can determine from those examinations. Back to early colonial days, so we're familiar with this Smith map. This portrays an area rich with settlement, rich with native settlement. But what happens? If this is 1612 or so, somewhere near our campus, we have this document signed after much agitation and Anglo-Powhatan wars, more than one, the Treaty of Middle Plantation, 1677. So Jamestown, 1607. 70 years later, we have a treaty of peace under Charles II. And I will move some of you around because I like to see who's, in case people have their hand up with a question, but you can see the signatory page here. Marks from the Queen of Pamunkey, the Nottaway, the Nansemond, some of the very tribes that Calandra mentioned in our acknowledgement statement, they're right here. So they're talking about this continuity, et cetera, but what does this treaty say? And what does it have to do with sustainability? And is it art? Well, it's an important document which Native people feel maybe has impacted their lives tremendously. There are 21 articles in this. And I just wanted to show you very quickly Article 7 from the 1677 treaty. It says that the said Indians have and enjoy their wanted conveniences of oystering, fishing, gathering tuckahoe, etc. I don't know how many have you had pecan this morning or wild oats, anything else useful for their natural support, but essentially not useful to the English. I ask you to think about that. What's happened in 70 years or a little bit more from the White's drawings of prosperity and a magnificent environment to Native people being restricted into what they can actually extract from the environment for their own health and welfare. Right now at Jamestown, an exhibit up is this piece. This is a textile that's part of the Broken Treaty Quilt series by Gina Adams. And this is a textile of the treaty that we just said made into a piece of art. I can tell you, I don't have time to spend a lot of time on this, but on the Cohope Reservoir issue that I worked with people in my department against the building of a dam there. This treaty was really important aspects of this treaty to say there's a buffer mile, that's a 3-mile buffers around indigenous lands that should not be broached, and the building of this dam would have been inside this. Yet the United States said, 1677 treaty, we're not part of it. There is no United States then, so the treaty doesn't have standing. So these documents, her series of broken treaty quilts now gives you some understanding of why this is considered a broken treaty. So we have the treaty. Well, if we were going to series, we have White in his pictures, the founding of Jamestown, Anglo-Powhatan Wars. We have the Treaty of 1677. I showed you one article restricting food that Native people can take in our area, and it's have a petition from the Queen of Punky, Queen Anne, not Kokokoeske, who signed the 1677 treaty, but the next leader. And this document basically says we are starving. We don't have enough male hunters. We need relief. So in barely a century, look what has happened in terms of sustainability and indigenous people in our own area. I find this really interesting, given what we just talked about. Here's the seal of the Pamunkey Nation right now. We see the sunflower circular area, the river, corn. This looks like it's taken from White's imagery and not from the petition by Queen Anne asking for help with food, etc. But this is the current one, their conception of a world that is sustainable, that is prosperous, that thriving, as Calander said, this would be their ideal. Whether they have that right now, I couldn't say, other than sadly to say the fisheries hatchery that they have maintained since the early 1900s of shad, that's essentially a collapsed fishery at this time. So we have problems right in our own area, an hour and a half from our campus. We have issues of sustainability that are critical and easily identifiable. What happens afterwards? Well, we could go on for hours about history, but I'm just going to insert the notion of manifest destiny and progress to the West. I've selected one. There are many paintings by Europeans and Americans expressing this, but I particularly chose this one because we can see Native people fleeing in advance of the march of progress with trains, all these other kinds of metal tools, inventions, people coming. And it's this dramatic and seemingly patriotic vision. But what is it in reality? To clear the plains, the subsistence of indigenous people on the plains was also destroyed post-Civil War. It might be a second kind of scorched earth policy that was used during the Civil War. And here, these are actual photographs. I can't say that's art, but we can see what happens when nearly 40 million bison are systematically destroyed to basically move indigenous people out of the way and construct railroads across the continent. Today's bison, in fact, I have bison in the refrigerator. This is if I like to eat occasionally. These have all been herds that have had to be revitalized. The bison, originally roaming free bison at one point from 40 million, were certainly certainly down to less than 100. And the New York Botanical Gardens brought some of those bison back east. Pretty much all of the revitalized herds are descendants biologically from those that were recovered and brought to New York and put into safety. It's an astonishing assault on an environmental system, we might say. But what does this do, this slaughter of the bison? Also, we have Native people giving up land, and as settlement incurs to the west. This was done through treaties. There's an actual photograph of the Treaty of Fort Laramie in 1868 and an actual copy, image of the actual handwritten copy. This is considered by the Library of Congress to be one of the most important documents in American history. You can find it online. You can read it yourself. You can see what the different articles are, but basically sets up a reservation system and ends Plains Indians' lifeways as they had known it, at least for 100 years. Gina Adams also made this piece of art memorializing the Fort Laramie Treaty. Is this art? No, but it speaks to sustainability. And I wanted to point out these advertisements, once the Plains tribes are reservated, these are advertisements for fine lands in the West, irrigated, is great for agriculture and dry farming. I don't have time in this discussion to talk about Dust Bowl, to talk about where we get the water for our bread baskets in Nebraska and Kansas. It's not necessarily just from the rain. We're pumping groundwater at alarmingly large rates. But this is a Native story, and the post-war Native story. How do we get to art? Is there art up until this point? Remember, you're thinking about those things I asked you to think about up front. Here we have a turning point. We in anthropology, and a number of us in art history, look to the ledger art by prisoners of war in the 1890s who were given paper, colored pencils, I guess not pens, and drawings. This is the sort of thing that they drew. This is by a Cheyenne prisoner of war. Many of them recounted, of these drawings recount war deeds. Some of them are humorous. Some of them are about their imprisonment. Some of them are about spiritual stories. But for me, this is the beginning of what we might categorize in a Western sense of art. I'm not going to read this. I want to point it out to you. This is a new book, Earth Keeper by N. Scott Momaday, a Kiowa author. He's one of my favorites. And he speaks about the bison loss that the Kiowa, the grief that the Kiowa went through, the hunger that they went through, and the shame and the wounds on the earth from losing their primary food source, the bison. So it's a short book, but it's very beautiful, and it tugs at the heartstrings. But Scott is a wonderful writer and a former winner of the Pulitzer Prize. It's worth looking at. So I'm back to the question. Once we have reservated Native people and settlers, European settlers and Americans from the East take over the landscape, what happens to art? I showed you a little bit about ledger art. Well, there's a bit of interest in archaeological objects. I've given you two examples here from Cahokia, which is along the Mississippi, spiral mounds along the Arkansas. This is where we go to start building collections, museum collections, these kinds of things. Are they signed? No. Do they speak to sustainability? They probably could. Were they being asked to speak to sustainability at the time of collection? Well, maybe somewhat. But it was more of categorizing these objects according to emerging categories in both anthropology and a little bit in art and art history. Another scene from Anasazi to Ancestral Pueblo. What do we do with these people? Where were they? Here's Mesa Verde. There's nobody living there. Questions then emerge. Where did everybody go? We were absorbed with these questions, whether we turn to ask Native people, where did everybody go? Took a while, but more recently that has been the case. So back to art. Something really important happens in 1929, and it's the publication of the portfolio of the Kiowa Five. The image of the portfolio on the right is one that we actually have in the museum. So you can see it. The one we have is actually not from 1929, but is the 1979 reissue of this important portfolio. 30 prints done by American Indians. This is one person, Stephen Mopope, who's Kiowa. And I want you to see the kind of art that's in this portfolio. Looks very, I don't know what you would think, traditional, very little landscape, movement of horses, hunting, dances with men and women, a lot of emphasis on traditional clothing during ritual, etc. With the printing of this portfolio, the Native art in Europe took on a new level of meaning. People in Europe, colonizers, were always interested in the kinds of objects I showed you before, from archaeological pieces, sort of curiosities and oddities, but now we are entering art. This art, you can see here, Mopope has signed his name. We know who did this. We have a sense of training of this. So Native art is entering a brand new era with this. Who are the Kiowa Five? You see them pictured on the side here with their professor of the University of Oklahoma, Oscar Jacobson, who took these students in. These are the first American Indians ever trained in art at a university, who are really not taking any classes but art. They're given supplies and pencil and paper, kind of like their great-grandfather. And two of them actually are the great-grandsons of prisoners of war who did the ledger art that I showed you a few slides ago. On the other side, that would be me with some of my students visiting Oscar Jacobson's house. Some other time I'll tell you the story about the house, and that today it is run by the Kiowa tribe, and it's essentially on the campus of the University of Oklahoma because of this tradition in the 1920s. Where is art then? Is it about sustainability? I would say art at this point in time for Native people is about identity. It is about tradition. It's about cultural affiliation and expressing themselves, their own narratives to kind of talk about the past. Woody Crumbo, I want to say it's just the Kiowa, but here, this is mid-century. This would be the late 40s, early 50s. I don't want to be a pejorative, a sort of Disney-esque portrayal of deer. He's done a lot of blue deer, jumping deer, very, very popular artist at the time. But you can see it seems to avoid political statements. It's about nature. It is about open space. This is what the art seems to look like. And some of us refer to this style of art as the Bambi School of Art, but it was very popular for a long time. And if you find a piece like this on the market, it should be collected. But this kind of work is rarely done anymore. I do have to say Woody Crumbo did this piece, Land of Enchantment, and you can see this is a critique. This is in the late 40s. So Woody Crumbo from the Blue series of animals has really taken a turn to something that is very political. And asking our question about sustainability, we could see this is about Navajo people selling things to tourists. And it can also be read as moving to a cash economy, using art and crafts to kind of move into a cash economy to supplement their incomes at this time. What's Reservation Life during this time? Well, this is a more contemporary photo. It's kind of brutal, but this is not incorrect. Natives in reservated spaces had a difficult time. Even today, these are places that are fairly isolated, high rates of unemployment. high rates of suicide, places of despair and poverty, although a number of tribes are trying to change that. But in our moment of COVID-19, these places have been very hard hit by the pandemic. These don't look like places for which a lot of art is going to be generated. Why is that? Because you're trying to survive. Daily life is about survival, less about artistic endeavors. Reservation economies are based often on resource extraction, and what money comes in usually comes in from federal programs and not really growing new ideas, etc. Again, we hope this changes. But back to art. What moves art a little bit further in the direction, sorry, I have a phone call, of contemporary art? I want to say, put down this idea that the Indian Claims Commission, 1946 to 1978, in which tribal leaders post-World War II are becoming more political and trying to negotiate for compensation for broken treaties, land cessations that were illegal, etc. During this time, 1946 to 1978, looks like a good period of time. There are hundreds of cases. This map before you, which may be a little hard to read, just is the dates of the land secession by tribes to the federal government. So the Claims Commission saying, okay, we're going to look this over, right? Yes, maybe this was illegal. We should have been paid for this. Almost $900 million was paid out to tribes during this time. And then the commission was just basically disbanded. And I don't want to say it made everything better, but it was an acknowledgement by the federal government that things hadn't gone well with assimilationist policies, etc., for Native people. During the Claims Commission time, there emerges a political movement. I have an exhibit with my students up at the Muscarelle's website. It's called Rising, the American Indian Movement in the Third Space of Sovereignty. You can look at that for a more in-depth look at exploration of this political movement. This is one image from the opening of the exhibition that I really like. And it is pertaining to dislocation of tribal members from reservations and urban forced movement into the cities. Again, one final big push towards assimilation that also doesn't go well, but has consequences, both political and in art and artistic expression for what this feels like for Native people. Some of it comes through in logos, such as this image of the logo for AIM. And as this is moving forward, something else happens that moves our art question forward. And that's the establishment in Santa Fe of an Indian art school that eventually becomes the Institute for American Indian Art in 1979. It becomes the locus of both political art and training for Indigenous people from all over North America by application. First, it's art, but it becomes painting, drawing, sculpture, jewelry making, and even today, filmmaking, photography, and writing. And we had Tommy Orange out with us 2 years ago. He's a graduate of this program, and his excellent book, There was written as a student under at the Santa Fe Indian Art students. So who's teaching there is something I wanted us to look at. Fritz Scholder is one of the instructors in Santa Fe, and this does not look like Blue Bambi. Fritz Scholder takes a step out to talk about Native art and pain and screaming in a way that nobody has seen before. He influences a generation of students in ways that we are still feeling the ripple effect. And then another step forward. And to me, this is a personal step for me because I saw this exhibit and I was really overwhelmed by the questions that it asked. And one question that it asked that I've asked all of you today is, what is American Indian art? This was a groundbreaking exhibition in Oklahoma. And essentially, It said, all of you have been thinking that you classify Native art as primitive. So we've kind of answered the first question that I asked you. Those objects were seen as produced by primitive people. And the exhibit in 85 said, we need to talk about aesthetics. It's really not where we are today, but it kind of blew the lid out of who is imposing categories on Indigenous art. A very, very important exhibition. Followed in a few years later by Sally Price, who used to teach here at William and Mary in Anthropology and American Studies. Her book, Primitive Art in Civilized Places, really called for reflection on the mystique of connoisseurship on Native art. That people outside Indigenous societies will decide how to categorize art, how to value art, without ever really understanding the history behind it. And here's where we might once again get to issues of sustainability, that maybe what is being produced actually is telling a narrative that includes communities, thriving systems that are interconnected. 1922, so that school that is established in Santa Fe is really linked to an earlier movement in 1922, which you see on one side, the black and white image of it, an Indian art market. These look more like the first pieces that I showed you at the opening of this presentation. Pots, pieces of jewelry sold for cash, not terribly expensive. And on the right is a much more recent photograph of what it looks like pre-COVID, the end of August, a weekend, the end of August, where people come by the thousands from all over the world, and museums, representatives, to buy contemporary art signed by famous individuals. This is also a weekend of awards, etc. It drives much in the art world. I wanted to show this piece, which I think is beautiful, of the quality of the Santa Fe Indian art world that we own and have been gifted at the Muscarelle. And we can see Blue Corn by Charlie Pratt. I had planned to talk about corn as an important object, but you can see its importance by looking at this piece that is inlaid turquoise, jet, and coral, and with bronze sculpture. It's a magnificent piece. And this speaks to sustainability, speaks to a thriving community, the importance of corn. And so corn is a theme that stays throughout all of art. And I'm looking to the next image. Lots going on. That groundbreaking exhibit, and within a year or two of that groundbreaking exhibit, and students are at Santa Fe Art Institute, and the American Indian movement has been going forward, what starts to happen? This kind of installation piece by the recently late James Luna, artifact piece, in which the Native person says, I'm going to demonstrate the gaze of art on a Native people. We are artifacts ourselves. So for 4 hours at a time, James Luna put himself in the exhibition as an artifact. And I have it on good authority that even though Mr. Luna is deceased, Princeton University has just bought this table and the other little pieces that go with this. So this was also a groundbreaking event, and having people think about, in academic fields, anthropology, art history, American studies, how are you categorizing us? How do you display us? Where do we have our voice in this? I put this in here. This is a piece we do have at the museum. I was thinking about this morning, Jean Quick-to-See Smith's tourist season, and thinking back to Woody Crumbo's Land of Enchantment. This might be her response to it. But Jean Quick-to-See Smith, recently, a piece of her work was last year put in the National Gallery of Art. This is the first time the National Gallery has acquired a piece of art by a Native person. So my question about what is art is, it can be followed right through to how long it took for major galleries to begin to collect Native art. 1998, so I'm following a bit of chronology here. Another installation piece, Blue Corn, Jolene Rickard, who created this piece after the Tuscarora really had to battle with New York State over building of dams and flooding areas. And she's created in the shape of a longhouse, the corn at the center, the life of the people. The photographs around it refer to one side, the lives of the Tuscarora, other side, corn itself and the importance of corn. What next comes in the mix? We're doing a broad brush here is the founding of the American Indian Museum, National Museum of American Indian in DC that opens in 2004. But right after the founding of this comes the NAGPRA legislation, Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, that totally changes the landscape of who gets to say what, who gets to own what, in 5 categories of objects, and one that includes human remains, but for federally recognized tribes. 1992, and I actually was at this event, so I'm referencing 2 things in my own personal life. This event, when the Hopi Prophecy was brought to the United Nations, I thought this was very relevant to issues of sustainability. I suggest you go online. There's a nice video of this event that happened when the four religious leaders traveled from Hopi during the year of Indigenous people to bring their prophecy. And the prophecy was about sustainability, essentially, concern of the condition of the world, asking leaders to take responsibility to change behavior, that we are headed in the wrong direction. And they thought that this was something to do that was important. Art moves forward with all of these concepts, very much linked to food, food security, sustainability, and colonization. I like this piece, Last Thanks by Wendy Wedstar, Anishinaabe, I'm sorry, Apsaloke, she's Crow. And we can see a little bit of humor, but a little bit of irony and a little bit of pain in a piece like this. And perhaps, I don't know what you're all having for lunch while I'm speaking at lunchtime, but I hope it's not some of these things. But this is a great piece, and she continues to do a lot of work like this. Again, I'm losing my ability to move forward. This piece I love. I tried to acquire this for William and Mary. I was unsuccessful. It might look like it's a little kid's piece. This again is in the tradition of a little bit of irony. I love this piece, Lego My Land by Stephen Paul Judd. Not a cartoon. These are younger artists who are using art as a way to discuss issues of sustainability, Indigenous history, and reframe the concept of art in their own way to their own narratives. This is the one that got away. This is also by Stephen Judd. And again, he likes having fun. I had him out here to William and Mary in 2011. He says, I like words, I like film, I like doing something different. I'm particularly fond of it looks like an advertisement for a fight, greatest fight in history. He's got Custer versus Sitting Bull. He's having some fun with this, but there's also a very serious side to Stephen Judd, who is a Kiowa and Choctaw. And then the other piece on the right is entitled 1491, where the young men are managing to fight off the invaders. Punky Echo Hawk's piece. This is currently an image of this is up in the Sadler Center right now in a small installation that the Muscarelle, American Indian Resource Center, and students from the American Indian Students Association installed last November. It's called Native Art in a Native Place. It's also in honor of our land acknowledgement, but there are a few pieces up there. If you're on campus and you have time, go up and see it. But this was also a live paint, and there is a video of Punky doing this piece at William and Mary. You can find it online. But if you look at it, the image, 1491 of corn, Punky's very interested in food security. And he is letting us know clearly that post 1492, Native people have issues with sustainability, health, and food security. He continues to work on this line. This is one of more recent piece. Well, it's 10 years old, Inheriting the Legacy by Punky. Again, a different style of work, but it speaks to our issue. Frostbitten by Bear Allison, taking tradition, a modern means of photography, traditional figures in Cherokee cosmology, along with corn. I think this is about art and sustainability. And a more recent piece that we've acquired, I'm going to show you two, by Cara Romero, who's Chimhueve, a wonderful person. And I hope to bring her to campus next fall, or for artists in residence. I am working on that. Water Memory, where Cara is talking about the flooding, moving of indigenous villages, building dams in the West, rerouting water, and what it has done to communities. And of course, we could also analyze it. What has it done to the West? Is this the best way to use water? Similar topic with Oil Boom, very, very powerful image. She's a digital photographer, well-trained, and really impressed me with her kindness, knowledge, and wanting to share important topics in the Native world and discussion. Bleeding Sky, James Doe, he's Diné or Navajo, concerned about extraction of resources, uranium and other resources on the Navajo reservation. And we're back to this piece. So maybe you've decided if this is art or not, but I can tell you that Isaac Murdoch, and I think in a magnanimous manner, has a number of images and things that you can download for free from his website. He says, if it's used in support of indigenous land, take these things, download them, and use them, which is amazing. So you might do that afterwards. And I'm watching the time. I'm almost ready to wrap up here. I haven't seen this exhibit, but I really want to. It's up in DC right now, Picturing the American Buffalo. Catlin, who I refer to, is the first artist at 200 years almost after John White to draw images, paint, I should say, of Plains Indians. And I love the juxtaposition here. Fritz Shoulder, that original teacher in Santa Fe, the School of Indian Arts. Here he is as himself, as he refers to as Joe Buffalo. And this piece is by Jean Quick-to-See Smith, again, artists we have in our collection, but bringing them together to talk about past and present, I think is an interesting conversation that also speaks to issues of colonialism and settler responses to the world in which Native people live today. I'm going to end back on Our Own Turf. This is William and Mary Indians by Kevin Brown, who's the former chief of the Pamunkey. And this is a commission that the Muscarelle helped me acquire for the exhibit on the Bradford Indian School. We commissioned 4 pieces of work from tribes that we could document at the Bradford in the 18th century. And Kevin took the commission with all of them. We did not know what we were going to get, and this surprised me. And I want you to look at this in person. And it is now at SWAM Library behind the reference text. We have it out for you to see, and the way in which Kevin is thinking about William and Mary Indians, the charter, and their place in our own history of a university. He's reflecting on that. So I think it's worth seeing, along with, this is not on display, but what this was one of the other commissions. It's a magnificent basket by Shan Goshorn, Eastern Cherokee. We had Eastern Cherokee students at the Bradford, and she chose to incorporate traditional Cherokee foundations at the bottom of the basket and at the top. But if you can look closely, you will see She is also, through some kind of magic, created the Bradfordin image on this one side of the basket, and names and parts references from the charter on the inside. It's an extraordinary piece of work. So where am I concluding? I guess I want to say artistic expression has really sustained Indigenous communities through the past 5 centuries, particularly through colonization and domination of their communities. Art has helped them reaffirm their identity, their traditions, has at the present time reinvigorated them, those communities, while also causing us to reflect on the impact of colonialism on their communities. I think we're at a very exciting moment in both art and these discussions of sustainability. And I thank you for listening today.
Thank you, Danielle. I mean, yeah, I know one of the drawbacks to Zoom, you can't hear all the clapping, but you can see at least a lot of the emojis. That was wonderful. We have a few minutes for questions. If you all would like to drop any in the chat box, or we can also, we don't have a ton of people that would overwhelm us. If you'd like to go ahead and talk, let's see. Martin, do you want to speak up and ask your question?
I know how to unmute at this point, right? Thanks. I'll just read my question. Great talk. The intersection of American Indian art and sustainability has me thinking about time, including links between the past and the present with those ironic images you were showing, and also some challenges to essentialize expectations, plus projections to the future with deep concerns about environmental degradation and indigenous futures. So you can tell me if I'm barking up the wrong tree here, but to the extent that time is an important theme in contemporary American art, can you speak to that?
Well, thank you, Martin. He's an archaeologist. That's why he's interested in chronology. Yes, I think it's a critical component. And perhaps I was hinting at that in the way in which I rolled out things. I thought it was essential to not start. It might have been a little more engaging to just start with contemporary political art, but it just doesn't come about sui generis. It comes out of a time frame that is very lengthy. And I even thought about showing some Clovis points that talk about the Upper Paleolithic and on to our Archaic period, and where are our notions of sustainability? How are they read? Can we read objects as texts? So I think time, to maybe a country like the United States that's celebrating not that many years of existence, when seen against Indigenous people who claim thousands of years of existence, we might really think about that time factor and how we stand, where we stand in relation to time. And not only that time in place, I think the chronology that you're asking about, Martin, could also be linked to notions of circularity, seasonality of time. How do we want to even frame time? I thought about that today. I didn't have time to talk about seasonal use of resources that help sustain Indigenous communities over great lengths of time. Whereas in anthropology and archaeology, we might have questions about where do we see failure of those communities pre-colonialism, and what was the cause of that? Did it have to do with climatic shifts and changes? So I think time is a critical component, although today I would see time for contemporary and Indigenous communities has taken a kind of a fast, elevated space of action now. So once, sort of the length of time, that long durée to action now, I think there is some tension over that. And it's particularly non-native versus native tension and perspectives on time. I hope that made sense, Martin.
Thanks, Martin. Was Malvika, did she just leave?
I'm still here.
Oh, you're still there. Great, thank you.
So I first wanted to thank you for your talk. It was really, really interesting. actually Professor Galvin is my professor for my archaeology class, and we've talked a little bit about the Cahokia cultures and societies. And from my understanding, they had social stratification. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about if there was a difference in the theme of artwork between the elite class and the commoners class, how they approached art in different ways.
Yes, thank you for that question. Firstly, your question makes the assumption that we're going to say that what we find archaeologically exists as art. I'm fine with that, but maybe I didn't stress enough in my presentation that there was a battle over that within the art world and the connoisseurship world. I think there's those aesthetics and the execution of the art or material culture from places like Cahokia and Spiro that I did indicate in there are phenomenal. Our interpretation, given the context in which these materials are found, does suggest that there is social stratification. But one thing that interests me personally is to look at the execution of the aesthetics and this work of carved shell gorgets, other kinds of brass repoussé, ceramics, even fragments of textiles. The elites are not making these things, they are receiving these things. So there is a process of training, identifying those with artistic ability, feeding them, supporting them. You're not going to be going out hunting and then doing all those other things. I think that it does speak to very complex systems about what is valued, what is transmitted, how things are processed, but also the symbolic content of the material. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I think we're actually still really interested. There's still a lot of research that comes out of the work at Cahokia and Spiro. And by the way, right now in Oklahoma City, first ever major exhibition of the work of the material culture from Spiro Mounds is on exhibit. And I'm so frustrated that I'm stuck and not able to see it, although I did some background work for that exhibit and with Buck Woodard, my former doctoral student. So it's killing me not to see it, but that's a whole world of pre-contact material culture and complexity that's almost entirely overlooked. So that's an important compact. Goes back to Martin's question about time. Where do we begin?
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, Danielle. We are out of time, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. If you have additional questions, burning questions, please feel free to send them our way, and we will shepherd them to Danielle or reach out to her directly. And we again want to thank you so much for doing this, Danielle, and thank you all for attending. We have, again, another Sustaina-bite in April that'll be focused on the local impacts of climate change, but I also hope that you join us for that sustainability symposium.
Yeah, Winona, this is huge. I'm thrilled, really thrilled. I had planned to talk about her, but come and see what she does. Her work is really important. She's been a leader in this. This is an extraordinary coup, using a French and Blaine's word, for William and Mary to have her appear virtually in April for Earth Week. So this is great news. Please join us for that.
Please do. Well, thank you all for attending. I hope you got the chance to eat your lunch and that you learned some things along the way.